This is Epsom Common. It's a site of special scientific interest, part of the Ashtead and Epsom Commons SSSI. So it's two commons for two boroughs, which lie side by side, with an area of privately owned land in the middle, which is called Newtonwood, which once upon a time was coppice. And basically this is a bit of a conservation success story, because you can see this lot here in the oaks. This was a grazed common, and was a grazed common for many hundreds of years, and it was intensively grazed. Ashtead Common next door was also a grazed common, but it has a large number of ancient oak pollards, so it was basically wood pasture, whereas this was just much more heavily grazed. And that grazing for such a long period of time changed the soil structure. This is London clay, but on the surface there's more sandy deposits, so you actually got elements of heathland appearing here. Very little of that is left, but a lot of that was left when it was made SSSI in the 1950s. But when it was made SSSI, there was a process going on whereby grazing had basically ceased. It was not economic. And up here in Surrey, if you've got an area of grassland that you put cattle on, you can't expect them to stay there unless you fence. And it's illegal to fence a common. So what started to happen in, I suppose it was the late 1990s, is grazing started to be introduced, or reintroduced, because the whole of the common had become like that over there, and you'd lost this open habitat. And you can see scrub starting to regrow here, but there were a lot of quite rare species in this grassland, along with this heathland component, which were in danger of getting lost from the site. Even relatively common stuff like this here. Mine's gone a blank, can't remember what that is. And you've got areas like this, and areas like that over there, which is very good bird nesting habitat. Once you get taller, like in here, see all this birch, less good bird nesting habitat, but there's other species which feed on the birch, and like the birch when it's young. This is blackthorn scrub with bramble. Excellent bird nesting habitat, with this sallow sticking out of it. There's things like clearwing moth, which like that sallow, and you see it's all starting to flop and fall apart. There are species which specialise in some species of trees, particular species of trees for those species, at that sort of a period in their life cycle. If this was growing and you didn't have grazing, it would be surrounded by woodland, and you wouldn't have this sort of sunlit sallow with bits falling off the outside of it, partly in shade, which is a lot more habitat than it would afford if it was more like this one. See these in here, more shaded. So this is how the grazing works. It's not fenced, there's no permanent fencing here. See that structure over there? Looks like a letter N. That's basically a squeeze for pedestrians. And when the cattle are on this site, because it's grazed with cattle, not sheep, not horses or goats, the fencing is run along there, and basically people and their dogs can pass in and out without hindrance. And what was thought when the cattle first came here, I think we had 4 cattle, all steers, all fairly young, for a month, just to see what the local opinion would be. Because all the planners and people at Surrey took the view that people wouldn't like it. But actually people did like it, because it was taking a very urban area. This is next door to Epsom in Surrey, and reintroducing a sort of more rural feel to it. There's a J. and it ended up being a success. So it came back for a limited period for the next year. You can see here, this is a pedestrian squeeze. Oh, that's more like a letter M actually. A dog can hop through there, or the first line of fencing is up here. Smaller dogs can go underneath. And you can see what happens. This goes underneath here, and then you attach your fence to it, because it is all electric fencing. And basically that's enough to keep the cattle in and let people wander through when and as they will. But you can see this structure that's in here. Got these areas of scrub, some of it tall, some of it short, some of it sunlit, some of it shaded. There's a lot of herpetiles on here. There's adders, grass snakes, slow worms, common lizards, lots of common lizards. All of which would not be able to make a living if this was woodland. So what you can see here is like an arrested, all I can think of is the word sere, S-E-R-E, which is the natural progression from open land to high forest. So high forest in the UK, modified by large grazers, which are now extinct, is the natural state of affairs. And you've got this going on here. But if we hadn't come in the 1990s and put an awful lot of hours of volunteer work in here, paid for by grant aid, which had to be applied for, this would all end up like this area over here. This is fairly young scrub. And you see the browse line that's put in here. I'm 5'8". This is my eye level. So I can walk under here and just about get through there. That's the cattle. So that's a cattle browse line as opposed to a deer browse line. So next stop will be an area of untouched scrub. Look out through there and you can see all the different species. We're going over there. Right, we're going to look at woodland, but I got sidetracked. So this is what grazing can do for you. And this is grazing that's managed at a reasonable intensity. If you overgraze, you end up with very little. But in this little area here, if I was to put a quadrat down, say an area 1/2 metre by 1/2 metre, we'd come up with at least 15 species. Everything from wild strawberry, well, that might be a cinquefoil. See the little leaf, the trifoliate leaf? Right next door to it, there's violet. You've got all these little thistles, soncuses, different species of grass. And you've got fungi. Some of these are quite rare. There are wax caps that appeared here after grazing started. And you've got cow dung, which has been kicked about. There are specialists which live in there, including some fungi. All depends, of course, whether your cattle is treated with things like ivermectin bolus, which tends to make the cow pats fairly toxic. And you've also got edges. This is cut with a mower, so your edge is fairly abrupt. But along these edges, even though they're abrupt like this, early in the year you've got sunning sites for various reptiles. If you've got a prograding edge, so instead of being abrupt, it comes out like that and advances slowly into the grassland, that's even better. And this is the cattle doing their business. This has been cut here, and you can see it's chopped off. Cattle work a little bit like deer. And there are deer here as well, there's roe deer. No seeker deer here. If you've seen my other hosts, you'll have heard me talking about seeker deer. You've got mammal runs like this. And you've got dead trees which have been left as standing deadwood habitat. That would have been an oak. But let's go over there. So, talk to you in a minute. Okay, you've got a transition about here from the area that's been grazed for probably 15 years now. And over here, this is untouched scrub, which has had another 10-15 years to grow. And this is now secondary woodland. I'll probably do a separate little post on this as a woodland type. So you've got understory bracken. There are other species in amongst the bracken, bramble, and some coarse grasses, but not a lot. And in the modern day, this is the primary use of the site, so dog walking. And this is the area, edge of the grazed area. And just here, we have a sign saying what's happening. So this is further up. This is another one of those benches made out of timber from the site. Well, these are memorial benches. I didn't know him, but basically the public can pay a little bit to actually make a bench, all made by volunteers. Timber come off the site. That's oak and sweet chestnut. Still dead hard, and as time goes on they get a little bit shaky. Eventually they rot away, by which time hopefully the people who had the bench put up, their pain at losing their loved one will have eased. In the meantime, it's deadwood habitat because all this is untreated, and that's part of the deal. And over here, this is area that's grazed underneath a canopy, and you can see the difference between this and this. This is all bracken, Pteridium aquilinum, with oak, some turkey oak. This is a turkey oak. You can see the difference between this tree, that tree there, and this tree here. That's a non-native species. I've talked about turkey oak on my post before. So this is what grazing does. And this is a turkey oak. It's a turkey oak seedling. See the difference between these leaves and English oak. Very, very densely cut, and you should have, there you go, you can just see by my thumbnail, hopefully the GoPro will pick it up, there's long bud scales. But English oak and turkey oak hybridise, and this actually might be a hybrid, because I expected to see quite long hairs on the leaves, and they're just a little rough. You can feel them better than see them. So let's go and have a look over there. This is Epsom Common again. This is part of the area that was first cleared for grazing, and you can see the effects of cattle grazing. Just here you've got a holly which has been basically sculpted by the cattle up as far as they can reach. This holly's quite nutritious, and the idea is the cattle come in sort of April, May, and then stay on for the summer, so during the period when plants are flowering, but they can't get to all the plants that are flowering during that time because the grazing is what we call extensive rather than intensive. And they're on here, they're not supplementary fed, they basically live on the browse and they live on the grass. They tend to be young cattle, so they put on bone structure because this is very nutritious grazing. You don't really need supplementary feeding unless you're very concerned about putting weight on a carcass, which for very young cattle tend not to be. And they basically chew all this lot, maintain the edges, and there's some machine cutting as well, try and keep things a little more open. And gradually scrub comes back in, and then you come and clear it back again. And you've got all sorts of stuff coming up. There's two species of gorse here. There's a St John's wort. And some quite rare plant species have reappeared since grazing started. And this is a day in very late October, it's the 31st, so Halloween tonight, and it's very pleasant out here. And I've been keeping my eye out in the nice warm sun to see if we got any herpetiles, but no luck. But lots of fungi. This is an area of scrub that wasn't cleared, so some islands of scrub were left, and you can see what happens with a tree which is grown as part of scrub. You can see it's nice and tall and round, and that'll be about 30 to 40 years old, no older, even though it's quite a large inverted commas oak, similar to this one here. The whole site was cleared for Dig for Victory in World War II, which is now 1945, 80 plus years gone. It's now 2023. And it's just really pleasant. Face the right way. Boundary grade of London, one of the biggest conurbations in Europe, the most heavily populated, is 2 miles that way. A lot of people think the county of Surrey is either full of stockbrokers or it's very intensively urbanised. Not necessarily the case. This is just a little way away from where we were a moment ago. And this is buckthorn, food plant of the brimstone butterfly. Fair amount in there. And hawthorn, there's lots of hawthorn here. And with blackthorn it makes passing through the areas relatively difficult. Oak coming up, which is the climax vegetation, oak forest, so this is growing in amongst here. And birch, which is a pioneer species. So the scrub here shows lots and lots and lots of diversity. Diversity in structure, diversity in species, and also has grassland, which is more diversity. So this site is a site of special scientific interest, and once again, because it was in danger of being denotified at one stage, because it was all scrub like we saw with the bracken underneath, once again it's worthy of its SSSI status. So let's go and look at another aspect of management of the site. We're going to be going over this way because there's a group of volunteers working. There's a late flying butterfly over there, I think it's a peacock. I want to show you the volunteers working, because that's basically why, along with an enlightened approach from Epsom Borough Council, that's basically why this site is still worthy of its notification. Right, this is a British site with volunteers actually doing land management. The chap on the left is actually an employee of some Ewell Borough Council. There's some dog walkers, members of the public, and the bonfire over the back is being run by volunteers, and they're basically clearing an area of scrub. Down here looks like from the young gorse there was some work done here last year, and this is being done basically to keep a mosaic of different ages of scrub and different conditions, more diversity onto the site. Got a chap with his back to us holding a pair of loppers, so he's a volunteer as well. And yeah, we'll see a little bit more of this as time goes on. Don't really want to show you faces, etc. But this is how in the UK in 2023 sites get managed. So this is the volunteers actually working. And we've had a barbecue provided by the Lower Mole Partnership to celebrate 40 years of the Lower Mole Partnership, which was the start of countryside management in Surrey. So cutting scrub, increase the diversity of the site, and that's what's happening to it. And the reason it's being burnt is because there isn't the resources to come in and chip it, take it off site. Go ahead, thank you very much. And he basically gets rid of it with relatively little in the way of nutrient enrichment. In fact, the far site actually adds diversity to the site as a whole, because there are species such as a whole variety of mosses which actually specialise on burnt material.